Watch this full series at the links in the description below and subscribe to our YouTube channel to watch new mental health videos every week. Hi YouTube, it's Kyle Kittleson here with Dr. Ramani. Thanks for being here. Now, so many of our members have written, emailed, found us on Instagram and said, where is the series on complex post-traumatic stress disorder? And that's what we just filmed. Many of you have heard about PTSD. Most people have, but not as many understand or even know about complex PTSD. And here to talk about what that is and then give us the difference between that and borderline personality disorder, Dr. Ramani, what is complex PTSD?
So CPTSD is a sort of almost like a subset of post-traumatic stress disorder, but it looks a little different. And it's a result of somebody who's experienced long-term exposure to trauma. Usually where we see it is somebody who's experienced long-term child physical abuse or child sexual abuse, long-term domestic violence or intimate partner violence, or people in other settings like people who were victims or survivors of human trafficking or refugees, people who were in long-term traumatic situations from which escape was nearly impossible or would be dangerous, like a child, a person stuck in an abusive intimate partnership, that sort of thing. So that inescapability and the chronic nature of it makes it a little different than that episodic exposure you would have typically seen in post-traumatic stress disorder. So it feels a little different. What we see in complex PTSD is we see that there are issues around emotional dysregulation, lots of difficulties in interpersonal relationships, including excessive reactivity, reacting with strong shows of anger or fear of interpersonal relationships. There's a shift in the perception of the self. People who experience complex PTSD will often view themselves very negatively, as damaged, as shameful, sometimes even taking blame for what happened to them or believing that somehow they might have deserved this. And they may even have a skewed perception of their perpetrator and viewing them as sometimes all-powerful and then at times even harboring fantasies of revenge against them. They'll have difficulties with attention and concentration. In some people with complex PTSD, you may even occasionally see sort of a dissociative quality where they sort of seem to go away for a minute, but there's also disruptions in being able to pay attention, in being able to concentrate, which can make it difficult to engage with other people. So it feels different than the classical presentation we see in traditional post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a very fear-based disorder. And there's lots of anxiety arousal, hypervigilance, being on edge, having exaggerated response in the face of something that's startling, lots of avoidance. So while there's a tremendous amount of overlap between traditional PTSD and complex PTSD, some of the issues around dysregulation and the relationship issues that arise definitely veer away from what we traditionally see in PTSD.
Excellent. I want to poll our audience. When was the first time you heard the term complex PTSD? Was it right now in this video, or have you heard about it years and years ago? Let us know in the comment section below. Now, because of some of these traits that CPTSD has, it often gets confused as borderline personality disorder. So how can we tell the difference between those two?
There's a tremendous overlap between complex PTSD and borderline personality, and that's something the field struggles with. There are some key differences, though. Despite the kinds of relationship struggles people with complex PTSD have, and even sort of the strong reactivity that people have in complex PTSD, the flare-ups of anger and those kinds of reactions, one thing you don't see in complex PTSD are the chronic abandonment struggles. There's not a fear of abandonment. It's much more, if anything, there's a fear of the relationship itself, like relationships don't feel like safe spaces. People with borderline personality have a very, very unstable sense of identity. It's almost like at times they don't know who they are. Whereas in a person with complex PTSD, they have a distorted sense of themselves. So they view themselves as damaged or shameful. But it's not like they simply say, I don't know who I am. Does that make sense? It's very different. And then a third thing we see is, in some ways, it's a severity issue. Borderline personality disorder, something we've talked about on MedCircle before, is the mental illness with the highest rate of suicide, making it one of the most dangerous and distressing mental illnesses we talk about. So these suicidal crises, the self-harming gestures, you don't really see that in complex PTSD. So while there may be some risk because of the level of distress, it's definitely not part of the classical picture of complex PTSD. And so in that way, borderline personality, some have suggested, is definitely a more severe pattern, and that whether it's not considered a variant though, because there are enough differences. We also know that something both have in common, complex PTSD and borderline personality, is that very commonly people with borderline personality have experienced early trauma, but not all have. So not every single person out in the world with borderline personality has a history of significant childhood trauma.
Right.
Whereas in complex PTSD, that's far, far, far more normative. And in a person with complex PTSD, there's been at least one period of life where they've experienced long-term, chronic, relatively inescapable trauma.
Right.
So right now we grapple with whether how much overlap there is, and although there's quite a bit, there's something about the abandonment issues, how identity and self are viewed, and the severity of some of the behaviors such as suicidal crises and suicidal behavior that definitely differentiate borderline personality from complex PTSD.
Yes, understanding borderline personality disorder gives me a better understanding of complex PTSD.
Yes.
And our viewers can learn about the 9 traits of borderline personality disorder by clicking the card that just popped up on this video, or you can use the links in the video description below. Because the series is so great, I want to give all of these viewers watching an inside look into the series by MedCircle on complex PTSD. Here's a sneak peek.
When we think about the sort of whole interpersonal cluster of emotional disruption in CPTSD, it is very much characterized by distrust, a lot of up and down in the relationship, a lot of anger in the relationship, and a lot of discomfort in the relationship, but also a lot of devaluing themselves in the relationship, right? So whereas a person with borderline personality won't be on a steady, I'm so bad in this relationship, that's in CPTSD, it's very much that steadily that they devalue themselves. There's also a sense of a lot of numbing, like and when I say numbing, they feel very remote and far away and distant and can't feel anything. And it makes sense. A relationship is a threat because it's where harm took place. So numbing would actually almost make sense as a reaction, but it's not a healthy one. We'd like to let a person know it's okay to feel in a relationship, that that's a healthy space, you won't be harmed, but it takes a while to get a person to that place. And then we will see mood regulation symptoms in CPTSD, because there is negative mood, there is negative self-talk, there's a negative view of the self, there's a negative view of relationships. So all of that combines to a bigger picture of just mood and anxiety kinds of symptoms that we would see in a person with CPTSD under that sort of emotional rubric. But a lot of it is relational, and a lot of it is sort of this very negative view of the self in those relationships, as well as a distorted view of other people in relationships.
You can watch that entire series at medcircle.com. Dr. Ramani, thank you as always for being here. I'm Kyle Kittleson, and remember, whatever you're going through, you got this. Thanks for watching. Check out the links below for more information on how to access this full series, and subscribe to our YouTube channel to watch new mental health videos every week. Did you like what you heard in this video? If you want to ask a MedCircle doctor a question directly, you can learn how by visiting the links in the description below.